what differentiates us from machines, and how do you relate to that fear of these machines replacing us?
Oh, big questions. Okay. I'm
Glad you get to go first.
I'm gonna put on my artificial philosopher hat.
Our reality's changed now, though, because we're receiving reality through these AI systems and what information went into those models, how those models process it, how the software system of the chat application that you're using shapes the input-output of those models is all very significantly affecting our reality. And we don't really understand the effect of it. You know, they're creating things that are cultural technologies. They sit within our culture. They amplify what our culture is. They'll shift and change what our culture is. So what is it that we want to invite into our culture, right? What is that we want to bring in? How do we want it brought in? To aspire to create products that we do think are positive contributors and participants in our culture.
So how do we get out of this mess? How do we do that in a conscious way, intentionally?
Well, like any of these things, the first thing is to sort of admit and name and diagnose, right? So you can put names on these things and you can put yourself on a map. So that's the first step. The next step is to start to say, well, what does that mean for my relationship with my own cognition and my own conscious experience? You actually have to stop every now and again and say, okay, I've done enough framing. I still need to own this frame, and this is the one I'm choosing.
So we would like to be in 5-10 years is actually that, we dream of a world where these machines are helping us find new meaning in life, that it can actually be more efficient. That'd be great. But is there a way to experience the world in a different way? Is there a way to actually lead a richer life? There is a possibility that these new systems can actually lead to a more meaningful life. I don't think we're on that path now, but we could be.
Hi, and welcome back to New World in the Making. This episode is with Helen and Dave, co-founders of the Artificiality Institute, an NGO exploring how humans and AI co-evolve so our future with AI is more meaningful, not just more efficient. So together we talked about this new and still emerging relationship between AI and humans, what it actually is, how it's unfolding right now, and how they're shaping our reality, how we can bring more consciousness and intention to the way we engage with it. So let's dive in. Just a quick one, and I promise quick one before we dive into the episode. I really want to take a moment to just say thank you for being here. And to keep this work alive and help it reach even more people, I need your help. Just by hitting that subscribe button, you're becoming an active part of this new world in the making. And you're enabling this conversation to grow into directions we can't even imagine yet. So thank you truly. And now, for real, let's dive into today's conversation. Thanks so much, Helen and Dave. Welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
I'm very excited about our topic today to talk about AI and the consciousness into weaving human interaction with AI. But before we go into that, could you share a bit about your personal background story? How did you get to the point where you are right now?
Why are you looking at me?
I guess that means I'm up.
I mean, it sort of depends on how far you want to go back.
Exactly.
I think the older people get, the further they want to go back when they start the story.
Yeah, I think
I could do my undergrad and mucking around with perceptrons, but no, we got into we sort of really got into this properly in 2016 when the world was having a pretty big sort of first freak out about jobs and AI, and the sort of first wave of that deep learning, machines are going to take over kind of thing. And we got into that because our kids our two oldest were starting to get to college age and were applying for college. And it's not that they said, why should I go to college? Robots are going to do everything. It was more that there was this sort of creeping sense of, maybe we should understand a little bit more about how an artificial intelligence might impact what we think of ourselves as human, and what we think of our what careers and jobs would be would be sustainable through this sort of transition to AI being more in the workplace. So we did a lot of work on that, and that informed us so deeply, and we sort of got bitten by this intrigue of where this technology was going, and we kind of dropped everything and moved to that. And
wow,
I wouldn't say the rest is history, but we built a small market research firm focused on AI for investors. We sold that to Atlantic Media, went to work for Courts for a while, came back out and started essentially this. And then you want to pick up this year?
Sure. So we've grown from, the beginning of just sort of coming back and studying it again and building our own podcast and writing about it to building up what now is a nonprofit research institute where we study the human experience of AI. We do that ourselves. We're also visiting researchers at UC Berkeley's CHAI lab, the Center for Human Compatible AI. And we work with organizations to help them understand this transition, what it means for the people in their organizations, and how to help them be more effective, and to have it be a stronger culture. So our world is around thinking about how we can be in a world with AI that's more meaningful, not just more efficient. And we think that actually the strive for efficiency is one of the challenges that organizations are having a lot with this technology. And on top of that, we teach courses about this, and we run a summit in Bend, Oregon, up in the mountains in late October. This year it's coming October 23rd to 25th. We organize great thinkers, doers, designers, makers, people who are concerned, through to people who are hopeful, to people who are really worried about the future. And we try to come together and imagine something that we can hope for. And so it's a very immersive experience to get away from it all and to be with a very small, curated, focused, committed group of people that are trying to essentially change the world.
Wow, so powerful and so much needed right now. So thanks for the work. And did you have any background in any of these things?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've worked in and out of software for most of my
Okay.
career. So I was around and building software in the early internet days when we transitioned from CD-ROMs to the internet. So that'll date me. And building products in that sort of first major wave of transition of plugging computers into devices at Apple. So all of the consumer
Wow.
applications, the professional ones, those that were like going through this big transition when computers could suddenly start to handle media in ways that is new, that was very new and different at the time. That you could actually take music and put it on a computer, and then you could synchronize it with this device called the iPod. It was pretty revolutionary at the time. And figuring out how to create an experience for people to be able to manage that and to be delighted at the same time was a core part of what we did. And that experience for me very much informs what we do here, and that we our outlet, in addition to studying and teaching and building sort of immersive experiences for people, is to consider the changes to design and how do we think about creating new experiences with machines, because these machines are not like the ones of the past. And for 40 years, we've had personal computers and devices in our pockets that follow our instructions specifically. That's why Steve called it a bicycle for our minds, because it was a bicycle you could steer and speed up and stop, and it would do things for you. And it was an amazing amplifier of human capability. Today, these things are no longer bicycles in that way. They don't follow the rules. They don't follow the instructions. I just had a bit of a spat and an argument with one of the language models this morning that wasn't doing what I told it to do. And so we think about them more as minds for our minds. And sometimes those are powerful, and sometimes they're a little annoying and childish, but they have some capability of their own. And we can see a path where They won't be the same as human minds. They shouldn't be. That's wildly unimaginative. So, but they will have a capability of understanding us better. They will be able to perhaps be able to help us with lots of different things. And so, what does it mean to create a connection, an experience, an interface with a machine that has kind of a mind of its own, that can create meaning in a way that we've never made meaning before in a machine? So it's that the experience for me around working with these sort of major transition periods of technology is what connects to me for this.
Yeah, I mean, my original degrees were in engineering, so I kind of came to this with an engineering and complex systems mindset. I'd had a long career in the electricity industry, in the grid, and with renewable technologies, and had a very strong sense of the sort of complex systems side of it. And I think that part of what's and when I say complex systems, I'm not just thinking about like the engineering complexities of an electric grid. I'm thinking about the there's a lot of human aspects to the way that makes the grid complex. And when we started thinking about how the technology might start to interact with humans, um, the lens that I kind of brought on it was, well, this is just going to get a whole lot more complex. Over time, as things get more agentic, it'll change the internet. It'll change the way that we um, think about the resources that we access. It'll change our own thinking, and you can sort of see how there's this wide swath of places you can go to when you start thinking about artificial intelligence. There's just so many different layers and specialties, and whether it's geopolitics or the core technology, or and ours is to look at the way that humans react and adapt, which is rare. Yeah, it's easy to get $1 billion to build the technology. It's hard to get 1 million to build the people. It's a very strange moment that we're in, where we seem to be collectively unable to invest in the human side of it. So we're really committed to that.
Yeah, so beautiful and so interesting to hear both perspectives going into this. And I read your study report, which was very interesting. Can you explain a bit the core pillars of that study and what was the most, I don't know, surprising maybe for you?
So the study that you're referring to is we kind of shortcut call it the Chronicle. The reason we call it that was because when we look, we kind of imagine 100 years from now, and we say, what was this transition like to live through? And the internet will still exist, I'm sure, and but it'll be sort of like looking back to the Industrial Revolution. There'll be there just won't be that same sort of complete picture that we would like to think while we're living through it. So our original idea was to sort of capture and bear witness to this change through stories, through people's lived experience. And then as we started to look at it more closely, and as we started to sort of experience this sense ourselves that AI was changing the way that we perceived the world, we and we'd been doing workshops and working with more than 1,000 people over hundreds and hundreds of hours since ChatGPT came out, and we realized that we were seeing patterns of behavior in people that were starting to seem to us like they were quite predictable, and yet they weren't really explained completely by the human computer interaction scholarship, nor totally everything from the cognitive science. Now, we can't get across all of that, obviously, but we have a range of advisors that really help us with that. So what we wanted to do was to think more rigorously about whether this question of people's claimed experience, that these things were changing their minds and changing their experience of the world, whether there was something there that we should be trying to more methodically capture. So that's essentially what we did. It's hardly, it's an observational study. So we have, 2.5 years of observational research plus some digital ethnography and interviews. And what came out of that was that we see two different things happening. One is that people move around a terrain of experience that's relatively predictable in terms of what these sort of broad buckets of experiences are. And they're things like recognition. The first moment that you encounter these AIs that go and you go, whoa, I didn't know I could do that, and you spend a lot of time there calibrating trust, play with it. You start with, generate me a haiku of, something random, and you go, whoa, I didn't know I could do that. And then gradually you calibrate that you can use it for something at work, or maybe you can use it to search, or maybe you can use it to develop a new recipe out of stuff in your fridge, all of those sort of stories that we hear. And then gradually people shift to a place we called integration. And in integration, you're using these in a very productive manner. They're becoming part of your everyday life, part of your workflow. You're getting more efficient. You might be finding that you are able to offload things to this AI. Some people building little agents to go and do things with their calendars or whatever. But this sense of it's becoming more integrated into my life. And then there's another stage that we've called blurring, where you really get to a point where you almost can't imagine life without it. You don't really know where you stop and it begins. It starts to shift many things about your cognition, your sense of meaning, what you're capable of thinking about, what you might want to be thinking about that you never thought you were able to think about, those kinds of things. And then something will go wrong somewhere in this journey. There'll be a moment that we call fracture. And fracture is generally negative, but it can, it's positive to rebuild out of it, but it's a loss of trust. And you have to recalibrate the way that you work with AI. And then you go into this sort of state of reconstruction. You recalibrate, you put different boundaries around things. You might have different boundaries about the way that you talk to other people, about the way you work with AI. There's lots of things that are moving and shifting across this terrain. And the question is, well, what forces you around? What are these kind of causal factors, these forces that move you around? And this is where the research actually gets much more interesting, because those terrain, you could say that people have experienced those terrains when there's been, encountering a different culture. Those things happen. But in these other things that we call traits, which are much more sort of causal, there were three that we're particularly able to identify in the experiences that we captured. The first one we've called is cognitive permeability, where it's how much the AI gets into your reasoning. The second is identity coupling, which is how much you have the sense that you're coupled, and your identity becomes coupled with the AI. And you see that a lot with in professional fields, that you become very coupled with that AI for your professional sort of how you're going to innovate and make progress. And the third one is governs the rest, and we called it symbolic plasticity. And what this is the ability to the way that AI makes us able to change our meaning-making frameworks and our sense of meaning and what is meaningful to us. And part of that is because, we think the AI is able to create meaning itself, and this becomes this very plastic zone. So it's very interesting to see the relationships between these three factors and how it creates a different role that humans use when they use AI. And that different role that a person will put the AI into alters all sorts of dynamics about the way that we use AI, the way we explain our use of AI, the way that we present our ideas or our self to other people. And it's a very complex kind of map that we're sort of figuring out in multiple dimensions. And what it does is give us names for things that we experience and that we're observing in organizations and society about the way that we about how it's just changing everything about the social fabric.
Wow, so many questions.
I know there was a huge jump.
No,
but you got it now. That's like in 5 minutes.
No, beautiful. Could you maybe give an example for each of those traits, those 3 traits? And are there any main influencing factors that make you be more inclined into being one trait or another?
Well, I don't know about that second one. That's a really big question.
Yeah, we don't know.
We don't have any sense of. We're not even really researching that. So, for example, I would take that question to mean something like, if you're high on whatever ocean scale, the openness, conscientiousness, those 5 big personality types, does that predispose you to being? No, I don't think so. We don't look at that at all. It's our golden rule here is all about context. It's what context you're in, what you're trying to achieve, and context is just an enormously complex, not necessarily at the moment codifiable, nor would we necessarily want to, dimension. In terms of examples, you want to run with some examples?
Sure. Well, so we think about these things as there's each a dimension for each one of them. There's sort of a high or a low, and there's no real line there, but it's sort of a gradation. So you can be high or low on each of CP, IC, or SP, as the acronyms go. And what that does mean, though, is that they're all interoperating. And so what we get to is, if you can visualize it as a cube, because it's not a 2x2 with 2 dimensions, there's 3 dimensions. And so there end up being 8 different sort of combinations that you can sit in depending on where you are, interacting and how you are. And there is no fixed place for any individual. There could be some places where people kind of gravitate because that's just the way that they have approach the tools, the way they understand these systems, the way they want to be able to use them. But it can frequently move around. And so our view is that depending on where you are, it allows you to put the AI in a certain persona to be working with you. And that at times that persona is a really productive persona for you to be working with. And at times it's really not a very productive persona to be working with, or it's just not really desirable, as a persona. Like, you want to have, for instance, more separation from the tool. So for instance, we've been going through a transition, and I've sort of been leading this because it's my part of one of the things that I do is deal with the images that we use in our publishing. And we started with a sort of an abstract idea that we were using Midjourney to generate images, and that it started to feel uncomfortable for me, at least, as we deal with so many creatives, and the sort of question: Are we promoting a technology and a method that's removing, opportunity or threatening their opportunity? And we have not ever hired a designer to do our work, to do these images. It's always been something, long ago we'd use, stock footage and so forth, which is just sort of emotionally, intellectually underwhelming for what we do. Nothing against those photos. They're actually awesome. But so we transitioned to something that was a bit more abstract. And now we've been using these sort of biological patterns just to sort of try and reference something nature. And it was unsatisfying still for the creatives. But then I really also got to the point that I recognized that my IC was just definitely too high. right? I was too coupled with the tool. I could sit and put in a prompt and say, I want to have this kind of biological pattern. I want it to reference waves or rocks or geological structures or whatever else it is. And then I press done, and all it does is it does it all. I have no continuing creative part of the process. It doesn't feel like it's mine. I'm entirely too connected. I'm entirely too entangled with the tool. And the way the tools are built today, I have no way of pulling myself out of that. I can't really, in the cube sense, it's moving forward in the cube. If anyone actually, spends time with us as we teach these things, you get an understanding of the 3D space. And so we're about to launch a new sort of image, concept, which is just, it's actually for me retreating back many decades to back when I aspired to be a photographer. So we're going to use sort of abstract, images from nature because it works better for, our audience and makes a statement. I think that we're, although we think there's roles for these creative tools, there isn't the right role for us, in terms of representing to our community. But also I'm in the right place with the tool I'm using. It's not generative in this case, but it is a phone and it's a camera and I can do all those things. But I need to feel myself that I myself am the creative, and those tools don't allow me to really do that.
Yeah, so it becomes quite sort of explanatory and it puts a different layer on things. So another example that I think is quite compelling is that feeling that you can get when you're starting a Zoom meeting or starting some sort of collaborative online meeting, and someone's AI note taker turns up first, and there's this sort of sense of, no one really likes that. It depends a bit on sort of how conditioned you are to it, but that's not the same as actually liking it. And that we've been told that the reason that we have that kind of ick feeling is that it's about privacy and surveillance. And, it is. I'm not saying it's not, but there's something else going on as well. And if you in our work, what's going on, what the explanation is that when you are presented with that as a fait accompli and as a default position, you immediately question whether or not the person is using the AI so that the AI can do all of the note taking and they can just listen, and the notes are yours, essentially. They're going to give you some kind of result. We had a meeting with a vendor, and he had us pre-sign something that the meeting would be recorded. And we, with another person, had a discussion about this. How did we feel about this? And it was obvious up front that he was using that as a doer. He was able. The whole point was that he was putting his note taker in so that he could authentically listen to us and not have to take notes or to sort of try and memorize things at the time. And that upfront cultural signaling that says, I'm going to be listening, meant that he was going to have very low IC. He was not going to be thinking at all about what the AI was doing. We didn't need to think at all about what the AI was doing. It was completely in service to us. And that is so different than the first scenario I put up, where you instantly, what's really happening is not just surveillance and privacy issues. It's the fact that you think the person's doing this so that they don't have to listen to you, that their identity becomes fully coupled with the AI, and they're just sitting there sort of looking at you with the AI doing the listening. And they're offloading all of that. And that as humans, we have two completely different reactions to that. But we're missing the design and the signaling that goes into saying to someone, this is where I'm at. This is how I'm going to use it. This is my commitment to you. And these tools completely fail to deliver any of these things. It's up to the humans, and we're all kind of bumbling around in the dark. And because it is different to put an intelligence, an artificial intelligence into the space. So when you use that example to explain how low cognitive permeability, low symbolic plasticity, but very high IC, can impact somebody else, then people go, oh, yeah, now I see that the right way to do that is to signal that in this instance, this is a purely efficient mechanism. It's got nothing to do with how much I'm listening to you. I'm here listening to you. So there's many, many examples of that. We had one kind of quite charming example, which is very memorable, of a young guy who it was in a relatively high conflict, but nevertheless loving relationship. And he, so him and his girlfriend fought a lot. And he noticed over a period of time that their fighting had changed. And he noticed that she was leaving the room and then coming back in and saying different things than she would have before. And of course, she's going out of the room, just using ChatGPT to sort of help with fighting, and come back in and give a different answer. And he's livid about this. He is absolutely livid. And she is sort of befuddled, because she's like, what are you talking about? I mean, I thought you'd just be happy that I was working on my communication skills, So they both have this totally different meaning making around what it means to use an AI to fight. He doesn't want to fight with a robot. He wants to fight with her. So he wants her to have very low IC. At the same time, she's like, I'm high on all of this. I'm taking ideas from the AI. My reasoning is connected. So I'm high CP, I'm high IC because I'm really connected. I'm using it for something super emotional. And at the same time, I'm high SP because I think it's okay to do this. It's a new way of improving myself. Whereas he's like, I don't want anything of that. They're like completely opposite ends of this cube. And so you're able to just understand why there's so many disconnects that weren't there before. You got a third one in the mix, right?
Yeah. Wow. So how do we get out of this mess? And you are already saying, okay, putting some communication into that, explaining why am I using AI for, and how do I use it? How do we do that in a conscious way, intentionally, in families, in little, like, more domestic communities, but also in organizations?
Well, like any of these things, the first thing is to sort of admit and name and diagnose, right? So that's why this framework is useful to people, because you can put names on things, and you can put names on feelings, and you can put names on being indignant. You can put names on being excited and being overwhelmed and being awestruck by what these things are. So you can put names on these things, and you can put yourself on a map. And that is useful, because once you do that, you can see where other people are. So that's the first step. And naming is like, there's a reason that these language models are so powerful. It's got something to do with language. So as soon as we name something, we bring all of the concepts and we create these new concepts around it. So that is a rich space. And it's actually, you can stay there for a long time, just playing with the ideas, just naming them, just getting familiar. The next step is to start to say, well, what does that mean for my relationship with my own cognition and my own conscious experience? And how do I want to personally think about my own relationship with them? So that next step is doing things like recognizing when you're confusing novelty with simulation, for example. So you're playing with something just because it's a novel and you're getting lots of new ideas, versus you're creating a really useful simulation that gives you a different sense of what's possible in the future. You've got to kind of like break that connection when it becomes, you've gone down the rabbit hole, or you're starting to believe something that the AI is telling you, and you need to step back and have that moment of, no, that's too much. Like that doesn't fit what I'm trying to do. So there's a lot of constant, if you're using the AI to help you frame lots of ideas. And so you're using it to move the meaning making around, but you're not using it to really fully connect with your reasoning, you actually have to stop every now and again and say, okay, I've done enough framing. I still need to own this frame, and this is the one I'm choosing. So there's a lot of that sort of calibration work that you go through personally. And the challenge for a lot of people is to head it off at the pass before you fracture about something, because you can do lots of dumb things, like present a PowerPoint that's got a hallucination in it and you don't see it. And you don't see it because either the reasoning is too far and you've just accepted that's what it is, or you've kind of gone into that mode of, which is a bit sort of automation biasy, where you just think the AI is correct. And those habits, those are habits. Some of it's just good hygiene about working with AI, but some of it is that you have to accept that there will be times that you'll make a different kind of error, because there's so much to gain with getting lots of ideas and searching around these new spaces. And I imagine what it's like for scientists who are working with like much more scientifically driven models, say AlphaFold and the protein. You don't know what's real. You got to kind of take it all in, and then have a moment of going, okay, now it's my job to figure out which of these I'm interested in. And that's a shift, that's a process. So we help people recognize that is okay. That is that you need a new language, a new set of cultural cues that say it's okay to go through that. It's okay to slow down. It's okay to detach. It's okay to say you're wrong about something. It's okay to say the AI did it and it's wrong and I wasn't sure, but now I know. All of that language, all of those signals that say that we're doing that we're thinking differently. We teach people and we design systems so that those are more seamless, they're more transparent, the friction's kind of in the right place. Because, as you probably know that there's been an enormous amount of discussion in the last couple of months about people getting dumber with ChatGPT, that kind of thing. Well, of course you're going to get dumber with ChatGPT if you don't actually think yourself. So, but that's not the goal, right? The whole point of these systems is to make us smarter, not to make the AI smarter. So how do we put in place kind of natural new processes that allow us to slow down at certain points, to speed up at certain points, because we know that the evolutionary imperative here is to get more efficient, use less energy. If we can offload something, we damn well will. That's the pressure on us as biological beings. But we all have to sort of make that choice. What are we going to offload? Why, when, how? And you don't have time to think about that all the time. We wouldn't get anywhere if we had to think about that in a meta sense all the time. So we've got to develop habits that make it just second nature. And we're so far from that.
So if I may offer the sort of a structure to think about in terms of the habits. So as an individual, there's sort of two different ways to think about it. You were talking about small groups, right? Whether it's, a family unit, a group, and, a team in an organization, all the way up to an entire organization. When we think about that sort of culture, how do you build new habits within that culture? And so the individual walking in, you have to think about being aware. So this is exactly what Helen was talking about, like understanding, having a common language, being able to understand where you are, thinking through that sort of that cube concept of where am I? What persona have I put that AI in? What does that mean for me? How do I feel? That all awareness. The second is to be able to explain, to be able to explain to others how you are relating to that, to your AI system in whatever moment you're in. And again, these things move around. You don't have a static, relationship with an AI, just like you don't have a static relationship with a person or with your cat, right? Like things change. So, but where are you now in that moment? And then the third thing for the individual is to own it, to take accountability for it. And this in some ways is sort of counter to a lot of the narrative is that, well, we're just going to have AI and it's going to do it all for us. Well, but we're not holding the AI accountable. We're not going to be, throwing the AI out of whatever organization or family unit you're in. You're not going to be scolding them. You're not going to be, there's always a person who is accountable. That's the way our system works. And so whoever decided to use the AI in whatever way, they have to own that decision. On the other side, the important part of culture is this is not just about your individual and what you do. It's about how you receive others into it.
Mm-hmm.
So there's sort of a parallel. To be aware on the individual, for the group is to witness, to actually take time to witness exactly how they're using these systems or what relationship they're building. And parallel to explaining is to hear, to actually stop and hear exactly what someone says and why they're saying it. And then the final, in terms of owning it, is to support, right? So someone's walking in saying, I'm aware of how I'm using this tool. This is how and why I'm using this tool. And I'm going to own the outcome of how I'm using this tool. Then the other side has to witness, has to hear, and has to support. That in and of itself for us creates this dynamic of a at least your best shot at a healthy culture, right? I mean, you can't you can't snap your fingers and always have a healthy culture. Cultures are hard. But our view is that strong cultures are by design, and weak cultures emerge. And so just throwing these tools into whatever system you're thinking of, if it's just, as Helen was saying before, the young couple who were fighting, and just throwing that tool into the system created a big fracture moment, right? It wasn't by design. It was the culture that just emerged because somebody threw it in and didn't really deal with it and think about it and to think about what it meant to have that, in a culture. Same thing, scale that all the way up to a large organization or society as a whole. Are we actually consciously creating a culture that includes these new cognitive tools, or are we just kind of waiting to see what might happen?
Yeah, no, very interesting. And within that, I read also your article on AI and consciousness. Helen, I think you wrote it.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was very interesting because it is something that comes always together with AI. And you were also mentioning earlier, AI creates in itself already meaning. So what is your perspective on consciousness and in relationship also with AI?
Well, for those of you who read that article, my perspective is I'm deeply confused.
Which I thought was a heroic position to put in print.
I mean, to sort of be at the risk of kind of oversimplifying one of the most complex emergent scientific fields that exists right now, because it goes all the way down into sort of quantum theory. The kind of general thing that I was talking about in that article was that there's sort of this two ideas with consciousness, that it's either something that emerges from the physical substrate and the computation and the processes, and it's not in any way kind of sort of magic. It's an emergent phenomenon, versus something that is foundational, that exists as almost an undiscovered or characterized field in the universe. So consciousness is fundamental. It's kind of like electromagnetism, gravity, and quantum fields, or it's emergent and it comes from the information processing of us as biological creatures. And it's definitely oversimplifying, but it's okay that you've got these sort of two general pillars and everything else is sort of part of this sort of general debate. And my confusion is because I have no idea how to think about that right now. And if I had to flip a coin, if I had to choose, I would go the emergent route, because in the end, I'm sort of materialist. I'm a functionalist. I think that consciousness serves a function. It is felt experience. It is felt uncertainty. It's how we're guided to model ourselves, to model the world. It goes. I think about consciousness as sort of this awareness umwelt sense of who we are, and it's useful, serves a function, and that I see nothing to say that machines couldn't be conscious. How they get there, no clue. Is it the consciousness is fundamental, in which case they're conscious already, or is it something that comes emergent from computation, in which case they could be conscious already? No idea. But I think that we don't know, and our Seth talks so beautifully about this. We don't know what wouldn't make a machine conscious, and because of the state of our science around this. And I think that to me is a very grounded way of thinking about AI machine consciousness. That we don't know what wouldn't make it conscious, as opposed to we don't know what would make it conscious. It's kind of flipping the script on the way to think about it. The other dimension to consciousness that I think is really important is that we are just wired to see and to detect the kind of consciousness we care about. Other humans, mammals, we're kind of amazed by what an octopus consciousness what's it like to be a bat, right? So we will see consciousness in AI. We will, and we know that, the studies show that nicely. We respond differently as a result. And so there are very big implications about thinking that AI is conscious. It's to the way we make decisions, obviously to IC, to identity coupling. We're going to have a different kind of relationship with AI if we perceive it to be conscious. There are already a lot of people that, think that because if there's a chance that AI is conscious, then we have a moral obligation to treat it differently, to care about its suffering. And so you see there's this entire open spectrum of what it means to consider that an AI could be conscious, not least of which what's going to happen to us. So it becomes a very kind of tangled ethical, moral landscape that people have. We know that our intuitions will not be reliable in this space, that we will need some pretty deep thinkers to create essentially, new fields of scholarship around this. I'm not in a rush personally to dive into any of that stuff because, as I say, I'm very confused. But I think it's certainly something that is intriguing. We can talk about it for hours.
No,
we also approach the question of consciousness from a standpoint of how these systems might change our consciousness, and our conscious experience, right? And our conscious experience is affected by all kinds of things around us, including all of the people we converse with, the things we learn about, the experiences that we model and think we understand from that might be someone else's perspective, trying to empathize with somebody else's experience of the world changes how we experience the world, what we care for, etc. And the transition that's happening now is that the machines, we'd argue, are creating a fundamentally different experience for us. In the past, machines have been tools that we operated, or they will operate as a media to transmit things to us, right? And that's been a pervasive part of our lives. And so tracing back to, Marshall McLuhan and his famous, statement that the medium is the message, the machines affected our experience by shaping the message. So as humans communicated and were able to print something in books, we suddenly had these long form records and ability to read the ideas of someone that had written them some other time and space farther away from us. put it into telegrams, and the media and the message got contracted. We put it on a radio, and it had some level of emotion, but it was still only a narrative in an audio form. You got to TV, and suddenly it became about entertainment, and everything became entertainment, including the news, and including governments seem to be just about entertainment, right? And all of these things changed. The internet changed and shaped the message that we transmitted among each other. The fundamental change now is the medium is now not just the message, the medium is the meaning. So we're communicating with language models that are constructing meaning. And the language created, and the images created, and the video created, there's meaning there. There we don't quite have the greatest, sense of exactly how much meaning is originated, understood, and known in terms of on the part of the machine. But we certainly are making meaning and receiving meaning from these machines. And those machines are creating meaning in combinatorial space that we don't understand. It's operating in dimensions that we can't even imagine. So there's a new form of experience and meaning that is being presented to us through these machines that has never existed before. And so we find that to be fundamentally fascinating. What does that mean when suddenly the world changes in that way? And just in our lifetimes, we've transitioned from communication through media being all funneled through 3 television channels and 3 papers that would be available on your tabletop, and those kinds of things, through to the internet, where it's this blast of being able to theoretically communicate with or hear from billions of people. And that's had enough of an impact on society. And now we're sitting here having essentially a countless, an innumerable number of meaning-making models on our phones, that suddenly can completely, change our conscious experience of the world.
Okay, a lot of questions again, and one more related to what you said, Helen. And another one more to what you said, Dave. If consciousness is inside of these machines, or will be at some point, what would be the thing that would differentiate us from machines? And also, how do you relate to that fear of these machines replacing us? Because if we are talking about this skill set, their skill set is going to be, and is already in a lot of regards, way more precise. How do we differentiate human and machine? And then for you, Dave, also what you're saying is it changes then our reality, right? This creation of meaning. And you wrote in your article about consciousness how we also the participation of creating reality through observation. So how is that changing then our reality? What is reality for us today? Does this make sense?
Good questions.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Glad you get to go first.
I'm gonna put on my artificial philosopher hat.
Go for it.
I think those are all. I mean, they're all fascinating, huge questions, and there's a lot of people that have spent their entire careers preparing for those questions.
Sure.
The first part of what will we be? The logical conclusion of taking of machine consciousness, because see, we have this construct in our mind. We can't help but think in categories, and we can't help but think in hierarchies.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really intuitive for us all to imagine these machines just getting bigger and bigger in terms of the scale that they're able to handle, whether it's computation, data, number of parameters. And that somehow, somewhere, either with a new technology architecture or with scale, which I don't believe, but and never have, that suddenly this sort of mythical AGI will pop out, and AGI being like this like superhuman kind of but like us, but not like us, but like us, but not like us, and no one can really explain that. The first is that the premise of your question is what remains of us if a machine is conscious. Well, my first answer is I don't accept that the premise of that it would be the same. And I'm not saying that you said that. I'm just saying that other people might hear that. There is nothing to me that suggests that a machine's consciousness would be anything like ours. In fact, if they're conscious now, imagine what it's like to be a large language model. You have, imagine what it's like, what your perception of the world is. Like, we can't. That's the point. We have no idea. We've got these inklings, but it's like asking my dog to imagine Mars. I mean, or calculus. I mean, there's just no way her brain is capable of that computation. So our perception of a machine's consciousness is so ridiculously remotely unlike it. It's just not even going to be anything like it. So that's the first thing. Mm-hmm. So then you say, okay, and to me that's a very, very important principle by which we operate all of our work on AI. We think it's bizarre to try and build a human. Now, to build human-like cognition, to understand that, to master that, in the words of it was Richard Feynman who said something along the line, I can't remember the perfect way it was quoted, but it was, if I can build it, I can understand it. That is an incredible achievement. If we could build an AI that is exactly like a human, then we can understand a human. Yeah. Sort of. We already know it's different. So sort of. What's uniquely human? This used to be I found this question to be really positive and fulfilling back in 2016, when you could say that a machine would never be creative and it would never be this and would never be that, never have empathy, blah, blah, blah. And now we have these machines that do a damn good job at a lot of creativity that is very human-like and very unhuman-like as well, that are incredibly compassionate. The number of people that are turning to ChatGPT or Claude are incredibly smart. All of those things, they're incredibly, like, all of that. So then you get to consciousness and you say, okay, well, let's imagine that we click over this Rubicon and suddenly it's conscious. So therefore, you think of all these assumptions that are smuggled in. Therefore, it can suffer. Therefore, we have to care for it. And I'm looking at it going, that doesn't mean that even if it suffered, that we would have to care for it and would have the same rights as a human. And I don't even want to go to that point. So what's uniquely us at this mythical point where suddenly it's crossed this Rubicon and it's quote unquote like us, even though it's not like us? Well, the thing that drops out is that we are left to being the ones who really care for each other because we understand each other's consciousness. When he stubs his toe, I know that what that feels like. I have no idea what it feels like for a machine learning model to stub its toe. And
I'm also special enough that maybe you don't really understand.
So I think this is a very long answer to a very good question. And I haven't even scratched the surface. But I do think that we will, the challenge for us is to figure out what our new values are to each other. And, beautiful. What does it mean to be really good at understanding how another human feels? Well, at the moment, we call those people clinicians, nurses, clergy, product designers. There are lots of ways that people who are really skilled at understanding how to delight and care for someone else, how to make someone else's life really good. Parents, there are really many, many ways to be meaningful to somebody else and for that person to be meaningful to you. We are just struggling with what are the new economic values that will fall out of all of this if indeed machines do take Even if machines take a portion of jobs, it's enough to really change society. I think, we did the numbers during the Depression? During the Depression, unemployment was about the same as Dario's predicting for 2030 or something like that. Well, you can't tell me that that's going to be a good society if we don't have time to adapt to it. So those questions bleed very quickly into, we actually have to really understand what our economic value is to each other. If machines can do all of these things and they are used in competition with humans, not in collaboration as a first step, because it's about efficiency, then very quickly we're all going to have to actually scramble to redefine this economic value, or there will be none. But you look at, there are plenty of places where there are, we haven't solved even the most mundane problems, like trying to find good insurance in the US. Those kinds of things, that's where we should put the machines to work. And we get to spend more time thinking about, well, how do we make new products that genuinely delight people? So we have those structures already, but I think that we have no idea how this is going to play out in terms of this Cambrian explosion of creativity. You're desperate to say something.
No. I was just impressed at how you went from consciousness to there. It was that was quite a journey. And I guess it leads it while she asked me about reality.
Yeah.
So,
well, let's get back to reality.
So reality, I think in this, just to frame it, I'll take a stab and just sort of say that, reality is the context from within which we make choices and decisions in our life. And our reality has always been mediated by space. We live in the Cascade Mountains in Central Oregon. Our reality is very different from when we lived in San Francisco, or when she lived in New Zealand, or I lived in New York. I mean, just reality is different. Time, being present here in 2025 is very different from any other year that I've ever lived in, and will be very different from the future. How we receive information from others is, as I talked about before, in this sort of McLuhanist shape, is always mediated. So our reality is always shaped in some ways by choice, and that previous choices we've made, and in other ways by choices that others have made, that we sometimes can or can't control. But that's all shapes our reality. And reality now is shifting a lot, in that, we've gone through a massive shift in reality change in the last 25 years. For anyone who's in the sort of Gen X and above, as we are, and remembers the day prior to any internet connectivity, and, for younger people, it would seem a little bit strange to, go to school without an email address, without a cell phone. Like, you had to tell someone where to meet you and at what time, and then you actually tried to be there at that time. Like, our reality was fundamentally different. We've changed. The internet has dramatically changed. The phones in our pockets have dramatically changed our reality. All back to the same thing that I was saying before, in some ways, in that our reality has changed now, though, because we're receiving reality through these AI systems that are controlling foundation models underneath them, that has been trained on the collective digital history that they've been able to access in whatever way, legally, illegally, depending on your point of view, that they've absorbed all of that. And that now somehow has become, in some people, they start to see that as an authoritative source. It changes, you go to it to ask a question about what exists in the world and what is real, and what information went into those models, how those models process it, how the software system of the chat application that you're using shapes the input output of those models, is all very significantly affecting our reality. And we don't really understand the effect of it. It is something that I find perhaps one of the, there's some major changes. For me, it's that my reality constantly changes. Like, it's a shifting, flowing, choppy, messy reality. right? This morning, the conflict I got into was with ChatGPT. I was like, I want to think about all the people who are coming to speak at the summit. Some of them have recently published books. One of whom has got this amazing book. Blaise Agiriarchis has this amazing book on what is intelligence that will be published shortly. I don't think it's actually published yet. Anyway, I was sort of like, I need to pull together a list of, where all these books are from and who the publishers are. So maybe, we should just make sure that this is other. So, hey, ChatGPT, here's the URL for our summit. Go look up the speakers, go figure out who's written books, what the publishers are, and give me a list. It should be an easy thing, right? And what I get back is a list of 2 people that are actually speakers. One person who was once listed as a speaker, but unfortunately had to pull out, so he's not there anymore. And then a whole bunch of other people I've never heard of, ever. Literally, their names I've never even come across them. I was like, what is up? This is not the speaker list, right? That's not the kind of experience and access of reality that I'm used to with a computer. Right?
Right.
Like, I'm used to being able to do something in Excel or search for a file in my Finder. And as long as, the operating system's, is being helpful, it'll actually tell me whether a file exists or not. Like, I don't get this sort of random performance. I then got kind of angry with it, and it was like addressing user frustration. And it went off and actually did the task correctly. But that's just one little like micro moment of a very different kind of reality, that we now have these things that we're using, and I'm not sure what's real or not, or whether it's, so it makes it very messy and complicated. And I think that's what it sort of has drawn us into really wanting to study this human experience, to truly try to capture those moments, to understand how they impact us, how it changes how we think, how it changes how we make sense of the world, how it changes of who we think we are and what our value is to ourselves, to each other, to society, and to try and help people build healthier relationships by understanding their world and also trying to create new tools that are better at working for us.
Well, and you go back to the fighting couple, right? So reality...
Which, by the way, wasn't us. Just to be clear, like, story's not about
I did
us.
say early 20s. You are not in your early 20s. You go back to the fighting couple. I mean, for a start, I think that, even just social media has meant that everyone lives in a different reality in terms of their information sphere. But it's a fact. There are facts about the way that interchange went down. But it meant something different to each one. And by my reckoning, they were both correct. They were both right. She was right to feel indignant because her intention was to improve her communication skills. He was right to feel pissed off because his view of the world is that this is a human to human, like authentic, I need to be viscerally connected with you. There shouldn't be any cognitive scaffolding for you here. I want you to just figure this out on your own rather than have any help doing it. And whether he would have felt differently if she'd gone into the other room to ask her sister.
Or therapist?
It's hard to know. There's something about these systems, they're planetary scale, they're always on, they're the compressed knowledge of everything that's ever been put on the internet, which we know is biased and blah, blah, blah. And so it is very different to have these minds among us. And they construct their own reality, which impacts ours. I don't think we can expect to find people who share the same reality. It's a bonus when they do. I think that's going to be what defines communities, is that we actually have this feeling when we come together that we see the world in the same way. But reality as a unit, I mean, it never existed as a unilateral construct, as a ubiquitous construct anyway. But I mean, it got blown apart sometime around 2008 and has been increasingly sort of eroding ever since, because we just have completely and utterly different information spheres for anyone who's we're all affected by social media, even we don't use it. And that's what we know the math of this. We know the way the power laws work on these systems and the way that information transmits, the way it flows across social networks and how it affects the information bubbles, the filter bubbles, all that kind of stuff. That's all pretty well documented science now. So we already understand how much we have different realities. And now we're seeing some of the consequences of people perceiving facts in different ways, facts meaning different things to different people en masse in society.
And so what would you say is our responsibility inside of that creation of reality? And do you see any space for spirituality in there too?
Yeah, totally a space for spirituality. I mean, I'm not a religious person, but I'm definitely pretty spiritual. That's why we live in the mountains, go and look at a tree. It's very spiritual.
Yeah.
We enjoy doing that, or watching a river flow, those kinds of things. I think
yes.
Humans have, we're so deeply moved by something like by an experience of awe that makes us feel tiny. We the feeling of something being quite wonderful. Those kinds of experiences, that we grasp the ephemeral. We want it so much. It's so satisfying that we've come to believe that is actually what defines the line between the machine and the human. That is a moving target, and we will constantly push this frontier out, and we will be defined by what we keep ephemeral. That as soon as it's captured by a machine, it loses its ephemeral value. So it isn't an ephemeral value. So we'll go and find the next ephemeral value. And
right.
I think that that's part of the role that spirituality plays. The other way of thinking about that moving line is that I think people will attach more and more to their own intuitions, that they'll be defined more by their own intuitions, that it'll almost be a value to stand up and say, I am being guided by my intuitions. And that on one level is kind of nice and charming, because we all like to use our intuition and we feel valued when we're correct. But I think it's actually kind of dangerous to take that to too much of an extreme, for obvious reasons. Some people's intuitions are pretty goddamn awful, especially when they're captured by reality that has no grounding in fact. And that's really the big challenge. So what's our responsibility? Our responsibility is to actually recognize the value of expertise, and to be part of building institutions that can be trusted for that expertise. And I don't know, I'm a kind of science geek, so I'm going to tell you about science. Dave will tell you about anything else.
Well, I think about it as the role of spirituality that's an interesting question for us, I think, because neither one of us is religious. Although we both have quite a lot of experience in religion, having grown up in religious families or gone to religious schools or those kinds of things. So it's not a foreign concept. Wow. I think that the risk of the sort of mashup of AI and spirituality is that throughout the human history, we've had a fascination with some sort of all-powerful being, omniscience, that there's all the answers that can be provided by something or some number of things, right? Like we tend to be in more a monotheistic, phase of humanity than was, eons ago, when there were lots and lots of gods, for any one particular population. And there are certainly those that think that, AI, AGI, super intelligence, singular, whatever the words are that they're going to throw around to try and come up with something that's ill-defined enough that it sounds mysterious that we have to woo about, that becomes an omniscient thing that we're all supposed to stop thinking and just listen to and do what the machine tells us to. and
Oh,
that the machine will know everything, and the
and
machine will
that's
make all those
complicated.
decisions. Yeah, and that's the dangerous part for me in terms of
Yeah.
spirituality. Now, the positive part is exactly what Helen said: is awe and wonder at the richness of life. And we
Mm-hmm.
specifically talk about two things: awe of diverse intelligences, and this is when you allow yourself to understand the where intelligence really sort of comes from in all its various forms, all its sizes, specialties, intrigue. Like we will feature again this year at our summit Michael Levin, who's a professor at Tufts, who's a synthetic biologist. This year we'll also have Blaise Gardiarkas from Google. I spent enough time with both of them, you'll get a sense of what the kinds of diverse intelligence that exists in the world. And when you really allow your mind to step away from the preconceived notion that only humans are truly intelligent, and you say, whoa, intelligence is actually a bigger concept than that, you will have some awe at like, whoa, that's actually what happens
Yeah.
in them. Wonder for us is around emergent consciousness. And again, it's in that richness of consciousness. It's not just could a machine become conscious, but can we become conscious of things in the world because the
Mm-hmm.
machine can see things in different ways? Like, I love the thought experiment that, we all think we live in a 3D world. Well, what if that's just because that's what our consciousness is capable of? What if there
Yeah.
are other dimensions that a machine could explain to us? Like, what if
Yeah.
it could help me understand the umwelt of my dog, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because for some reason it has an ability to understand a dog in a way that I can't. I'm throwing out things that are likely much farther in the future, but when you think about, could we become conscious? Could it become conscious through us? What does it mean to be collectively conscious as a system of humans? We'll feature Eric Schwitzgebel, who's a prof at University of California, who wrote a great book called The Weirdness of the World, and he has a thought experiment of talking about the United States as conscious, as a system of people and places and things and so forth, all the way up to Benjamin Bratton from Antikythera, that's part of the Berggruen Institute, talking about the planetary, right? And so we have these sort of like, what is it? Can you allow yourself to think of consciousness in a broad scale? And when you do, you're quite
Yeah.
wondrous about it. Like, it's kind of
Mm-hmm.
amazing. So to me, the responsibility of all this is to allow this shift to help us really truly understand things in our world that we maybe haven't understood before, or we just haven't explored, or that the act, as Helen was saying, this sort of Feynman idea that once I create it, I can understand it. I think that's kind of what he said. I'm sure I'm stumbling
Something
over the
like that.
exact words, but it's the right idea. Like, that now that we're creating these intelligences, we're starting to understand things and more popularly communicate these things in ways that we haven't. Once you truly start to internalize and understand that changes your frame of reference on the world, on the people around you, on the natural things around you. Not just changing your idea about code and silicon and the systems we're creating, but it really does change your sort of outlook. And
I
to
think
me,
it's
that's the responsibility.
it's one of humility.
Yeah.
And I find this whole process of being embedded in the AI world for well over a decade, it's just deeply humbling. There is so much we don't know, and to be gaslit by this idea that it's all going to be knowable and we won't have to do anything is just bonkers.
Yeah.
It's just absurd. But it doesn't mean it's not going to happen, because humans have can easily be sort of manipulated into certain the power of stories. And there's a story going around that we're not really, maybe we'll go and live our best lives on the beach doing nothing. And that's absurd. That is not what the human condition actually desires.
There isn't enough
or
space
wants,
on the beaches.
There's none of. Well, the beaches are going away.
The beaches are going away anyway.
Yeah.
No, but I think but it does get to this point of, like, I think the other a sort of a responsibility part is to recognize that we're in this together, and this sort of cultural deference to whether it's the sort of strongman complex that's taking over governments, through to celebrity culture and worshiping anybody that said that happens to be whatever. It's taken over this mindset of how we reflect on and relate to what's happening in our corporate worlds, and especially in Silicon Valley. And so we have this sort of worship mindset over these leaders and these people who've created, billions of dollars for themselves. And that might have been okay when it was making something that was like, well, we're going to make a thing, and if you really like my thing, you're going to buy the thing, and you're going to use the thing for you. Like, that's okay. Like, whether it was a phone or a pencil or a car or whatever, like, that's an okay relationship. This is different. This is about, they're creating things that are cultural technologies. They sit within our culture. They amplify what our culture is. They'll shift and change what our culture is. So what is it that we want to invite into our culture, right? What is that we want to bring in? How do we want it brought in? And that, I think that's one of the core reasons we, shifted ourselves to be a nonprofit, to be mission oriented, and to aspire to create products that we do think are positive contributors and participants in our culture, that allow us to be able to get through this transition in a way that is positive and is full of awe and wonder, and allows us to live in symbiosis with these machines.
It's so important. And would you say, because you were also already mentioning the bias, and since that, Silicon Valley creating all these LLMs and basically having the monopoly over them, and this AI race also with China, there's this competing force and not really conscious awareness of how we are doing these LLMs. So how do we avoid bias? How do we take care of that? Is decentralized AI an option in some way? Do you see something like that emerging? What are our options?
It's a very challenging question. So but from the starting point of sort of the control factor of these tools and the bias that is being introduced, whether that be bias in the data or bias in the way that the tools interact, when you construct anything, you're creating essentially a bias to it. Because that's just the way that it operates, or the way that we operate with it. I think that there's the starting point, and that sort of this question of what does it mean when it's all concentrated inside a small number of companies, a small number of industries, small locations, small number of people. I think that I think it would be rare to find anyone in that industry that actually has malicious intent, that is actually trying to do something that's bad for the world. I think that it's more a factor that the driving forces of that industry, as with all industries in this modern age, really is capitalism and competition, and what has been but the dominant form, or one of the dominant forms of economic structures in Silicon Valley, which is extraction. They've adopted a sort of an extractive capitalist mindset of extracting from usage of people to be able to fund their businesses. And we worry about that extractive capitalism being applied to these tools, these systems that we're having intimate conversations with. And what happens when that knowledge is used to the benefit of the company that's actually creating it. There's definitely a concern point there, but I think that is the root of the challenge, is that they're racing to create things because they're in competition with each other. They're racing to make things that most people will use. They're racing to make things that are expedient, that are efficient, that people think is going to provide more economic benefit to them. They're racing to create things that can just make as much money for them as possible. That's the nature of the way of the economic system we live in. And I don't see that changing, or it's something that we feel like we can affect a change. Now, all that said, what can we do differently? Well, there's ways to use data in these systems differently than are being used today. We do like to highlight a company called Latimer. John Passmore, who's the founder and CEO of Latimer, is one of our friends and advisors to the Institute. And Latimer is technically a RAG-based system that brings data to the user that does not exist anywhere else. Originally very much focused around Black and brown history and culture, and broadening to be inclusive of lots of other underrepresented cultures. There'll be data that literally has never been digitized before. Trust me, therefore it cannot be in any other model. Historical letters from Frederick Douglass. I mean, old issues of New Amsterdam News. I mean, there's things there that truly represent a history and a culture that doesn't exist anywhere else. That is one way of addressing, this sort of question. The other sort of dominant form for me is that we today are focused on large-scale cloud-based models that are operating on large-scale data sets that have been trained from times in past, because that's an economically advantageous system to create. It's also kind of the way the mind is. People have been making these models, but there's no reason why the model doesn't exist just sitting on my phone and addressing the context of me. So that, it's sitting there and all of the information it has about me, I'm using an iPhone, so it's sitting in my secure enclave. It's private to me. It's all of my private information. It will be intensely biased to me and about me, right? And which is exactly what I want when it's sitting on my phone doing stuff for me. That's the bias I want. So sometimes there's a way to flip the question around to something that's more positive. But overall, this is the kind of question that you ask is exactly what we try to address with our community, and in our work, and especially at our summit, is we try to bring people together to say, this is something that's maybe not what we want, but how can we do it differently? We don't have to say accept or decline exactly what's there. There's always another way. How can we do this differently? How can we train things differently? How can we make things that are more inclusive? How can we make things that are more trustworthy? How can we make things that are more designed for everyone? Those are the kinds of core questions that we gather people to try to come up with better answers for.
Very nice. Very interesting. And I guess we gotta need to all attend to one of your courses.
Yes. Excellent.
To go to the root of this. Already going into more the ending questions. How do you see, with all what we've talked about and also what you were mentioning earlier about losing jobs, maybe asking ourselves what's our purpose, the economic system maybe breaking down in some way or another due to that, how do you see us in 5 to 10 years? Where are we?
I can take that.
You're going to tell me that. So I guess what I'd say is,
you start.
I think it's a harebrained idea for anybody to build a company that's based on putting people out of work. I mean, I struggle to find the rationale for any executive running a company, an investor in a company, that thinks that that's a good outcome for their company. There might be a short-term win, but longer term, the kind of economic disruption / destruction that some of these folks are describing doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, you get the what's now become a famous quote from Dario Amodei saying that he thought that we're going to have 20% unemployment. On a relative basis, the same percentage of people that were unemployed in the Great Depression. No company came through the Depression well. Right? Like there was no positive outcome there. Nobody was really winning. And so creating something that you think is going to cause that much economic disruption doesn't make any sense to me. Like, I don't know who's going to buy your product, and I don't know where the money's going to come to fund the next model growth, because the economy is collapsing. Now, where we go, like what's the reality? I on and off in my career, I've been in the business of making predictions, and this is one where I just kind of I'm stuck, because it's very hard to find any true footing on metrics that actually matter, that metrics that feel real about exactly what will happen. When we first got into this, 10 years ago, we did one of the big deep dives on labor, just like was done at Oxford and at McKinsey. And the report that we wrote is still way back on our website someplace. It was when we were called Intelligentsia. And we analyzed that, and it's a very difficult work to do. to understand the complexity of human work, complexity of human relationships. Every organization is, we like to quote Danny Kahneman, who says that it's every organization is a factory for decisions. The decisions are really hard to figure out. Like, how are you going to the what goes into our decisions is this massive complex system of solving for economics and politics and people and emotions and desires and your career aspirations and your bosses and all of these other things, that like the idea that you're just going to suddenly plug a machine in there and replace a human feels a bit bonkers. So we would like to be in 5-10 years is actually that, we dream of a world where these machines are helping us find new meaning in life, that it can actually be more efficient. That'd be great. Like, I'd love to get some stuff done faster and be able to do it, faster, better, cheaper. That'd be great. Like, obviously there's always something in your life that you'd like to. That's why we use these technologies anyway. That's what it's all about. But is there a way to experience the world in a different way? Is there a way to actually lead a richer life? You could say that we're just dreamers there, but like, I think you have to kind of be like, we do quote the old, the ad, those who are crazy enough to think to change the world are the ones who will. And we do think that there is a possibility that these new systems can actually lead to a more meaningful life. I don't think we're on that path now, but we could be.
And right. I think the job stuff is really difficult. It is profoundly unpredictable, and you kind of have to break it down a little bit. There are definitely some jobs that it's pretty clear are going away, like being a translator. And there'll be some jobs that are left with this sort of artisan human touch, like being an illustrator, that kind of thing. Then there are jobs that will have a significant part of the mundane stuff automated away and allow the experts to be even more expert. So being a doctor will be even more expert. Now, that will be in tandem with the machines, and the memory from a machine is better than the memory from a doctor. But the doctor is the one who sees the patient right in front of them and knows what the realistic best treatment options are, which is quite a different thing than just the diagnosis. And then there'll be new jobs, not least of which happen because the AI will continue to hallucinate and make mistakes and do things that humans don't want it to do. So I think one of the ways to think about jobs in that respect is moving into a world where there's increasing digitization. So more and more things do get digitized. So that will mean that, you could take anything. You could take like a plumber or a landscaper who wouldn't normally be thought of as a digital job. Those jobs will become increasingly digitized, being able to query a large language model about something in the field that you can do. But there's also, we have nowhere near solved all the problems. So there's huge numbers of jobs that'll be about solving new problems that we haven't tackled yet. Once these machines who that think in these high dimensional spaces convey some of this high dimensionality to us, we will actually have to sort of make sense of that. Humans are fundamentally wired for cause and effect. We need to know the cause of an effect. So even if the machines just give us high dimensional correlations, we'll have whole jobs associated with, well, what's the cause of that, and how do we design something that we can leverage that cause-effect relationship. That is the whole of science, right? There's this entirely new dimensional space that science hasn't been able to touch until AI helps us do that. It's like a new kind of telescope or a new kind of microscope. It's a new kind of measuring and detection device. So I think we're in for quite a lot of disruption, because you can't expect to put so much cognition into an economic system without changing the way that we all think. But it's a complex system, and it will do things we don't expect. There'll be tipping points we can't see. There'll be new states and new scales and new feedback loops. So none of this does feel sort of uniquely unpredictable. And we're also developing this intelligence and releasing it into the wild in quite a unique time of disruption from a geopolitical perspective compared to the last 100 years. So I think that those two things make it uniquely unpredictable. But, we have some hooks into the way that we think about jobs and the economic value to each other that will still exist.
Wow, interesting. And yeah, curious to see where we're going to be then in 5 to 10 years, isn't it? What would you see then as the new world in the making?
Yeah, well, I'll give you mine and then pan to Dave to finish. We're in a mode where I think we're going through a significant phase change, that the way that our economies and our intelligence has been organized is fundamentally shuffling around. We're having a reorganization in that. So trust in institutions has collapsed. We'll be building new institutions that people trust and reforming old institutions so that people trust it. We've got reality fractured and fragmented. We'll be moving to some level of kind of networked intelligence, networked decision making, new ways of bringing information and intelligence together so that we can see new common patterns to make decisions on. And the machines will make some of those decisions and we'll just follow along. So much more complex, much more bottom up, much more digitization. Caleb Scharf, in a book that he wrote many years ago, he's a space guy. He wrote. He put us. He gave us a metaphor that I find really compelling. That we'll be like the mitochondria and the dataome. We'll be in the data. We'll be refreshing the data, and that can be quite a hopeful way to live, but you have to be quite imaginative about it. But I think we're in a phase change. I think in 10 years, everything is going to look really, really different.
Yeah, I guess I'll just finish by saying I think the shift is very much what Helen was saying, is this shift to a complete reforming of all of our complex systems. And one of the challenges with complex systems is they're complex and they operate in these dimensional spaces that are hard for us to understand. You spend enough time poking around the Santa Fe Institute and the work that they do, and we've done a lot of that. It really, kind of breaks your mind. The people who can actually conceptualize these things are pretty impressive. But what's changing here is we have a machine that can actually start to operate in those spaces, can start to understand these things, and this new layer of generative AI allows those machines to communicate with us in ways that they haven't before, right? To be able to explain things to us, to be able to share meaning with us. And so we have one of the things we talk about is neo-semantics, is our sort of concept of a new world of design, of new meaning. And that I would hope that in this reforming and this sort of re-establishing old institutions, creating new institutions, that one of the effects of this new world of AI is that we're actually able to understand each other better. That it's actually able to bring some of that complexity to us and be able to communicate to us. But that will require a complete reforming of how we create technology and how we interface with it. Completely new concepts. It's not just going to come through text, I'll tell you. So it's going to be something completely new, but that we might come out of this phase change in a more interesting place. But it's a very high risk period of time.
Yeah, for sure. Before we go into the last question, do you want to add anything, something that we haven't covered?
Don't give your kid a phone for as long as you can possibly give them a phone. Exactly. Don't give them a phone. I'm just
no, it's a good
I don't
one.
think so. I think that I mean, thank you for the invite to this podcast. I think New World in the Making is a perfect title for what you're doing. And I'm skeptical about big changes, but I think we're on one.
Yeah, so true. Could you share a question that listeners could sit with and think about and reflect on? just to finish.
What does it mean to grow a human? What does learning mean? What does school mean? What does education mean? What does expertise mean? What do you mean to each other?
Love that.
What new thing could you learn or understand that would fundamentally change your life?
Wow. What a powerful way to finish this. Thank you so much. It was really an honor and a pleasure. So, yeah, thank you very much.
Thank
you.
It's been fun.